Whenever one is in a conversation where someone says, what's wrong with black people? Why can't they get over it? Slavery ended 150 years ago. That's fundamentally false. The reality is that slavery and all of the limitations that it imposed on the future and the potential and the progress of African American families, it didn't end 150 years ago. It continued until World War II, well into the lives of large numbers of African Americans today.
For more than 80 years following the Civil War, hundreds of thousands of African Americans in the South were pulled back into the shadow of slavery.
Buying and selling African Americans ended with the 13th Amendment, but that did not translate into actual freedom.
One of the fascinating things about the text of that amendment is that it says that slavery is abolished, except in the case of a punishment for a crime.
With emancipation, the nature of both crime and punishment in the South changed dramatically. In state after state, county after county, laws were passed to criminalize black life.
It was a crime in the South for a farm worker to walk beside a railroad. It was a crime in the South to speak loudly in the company of white women. It was a crime to sell the products of your farm after dark. But the most damaging of all of these laws were the Vagrancy Statute. In every southern state, you became a criminal if you could not prove at any given moment that you were employed.
Once arrested, convicts released and forced to labor in coal mines, lumber camps, brick factories, and turpentine farms. They were shackled, imprisoned, and tortured, sometimes to the point of death.
The fact that blacks were treated the way they were, like animals. People could be just picked up and put in jail. They could be lost in the system. Nobody knew how to find them. They could be buried in some grave somewhere and families still looking for them. Don't know where they are. I didn't know that the sheriff department could sell slaves to corporations, steel plants, and coal mines.
The constant threat of arrest and forced labor, like the threat of lynching, cast a shadow over the South. Slavery had ended, but true freedom had not begun.
And there are long-term consequences for these practices, which over the years have linked criminality and race.
This is how our country got in the habit of finding it normal to see such a huge population of African American men in particular incarcerated all the time. It also is, I think, really the missing link in understanding the persistence of the economic and educational gaps between African Americans and whites in modern society today. Slavery didn't go away 150 years ago. African Americans haven't had that long opportunity to recover from all the terrible damage of slavery.
Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
I just need a clear look.
When Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech, there was no way that he could have ever imagined that a new system would be born from the ashes of slavery and Jim Crow, a new system of racial and social control that would trap millions in a permanent second-class status, yet again, a system that has now come to be known as mass incarceration.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
And by next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
You will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out.
The new analysis of the U.S. prison population finds more black men are incarcerated now than were enslaved in 1850.
Nationwide, the numbers are staggering. Nearly 2.4 million people behind bars. even though over the last 20 years, the crime rate has actually dropped by more than 40%.
The United States has about 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's prisoners. Right? We incarcerate a greater percentage of our population than any country on earth.
Michael Jacobson is director of the nonpartisan Vera Institute of Justice, but ran New York City's jail and probation systems in the 1990s.
Now I'm looking at your report, $47,421 per inmate per year?
Correct.
Our epidemic of incarceration costs U.S. taxpayers more than $63 billion a year.
So tough on crime, 3 strikes and you're out, let them rot, throw away the key, all that stuff resulted in more mandatory sentencing, longer and longer sentencing.
But nothing came close to the impact of the war on drugs.
It is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
When it was announced in 1971, fewer than 40,000 people were incarcerated for drug offenses. Now it's more than 500,000. And here's the elephant in the room. Blacks use drugs at the same rate as whites, but go to prison more. Nearly 3 out of 4 people incarcerated for drug possession are African American.
It's emblematic of the way in which race is contributing to mass incarceration.
Brian Stevenson is executive director of the nonprofit Equal Justice Initiative and a professor at New York University Law School.
How do you answer people who say, well, the people who are in prison are bad people, and if they happen to be African American, it's because there's a higher crime rate in the neighborhoods where these prisoners have come from?
Well, I'd say for many offenses, it's simply not true. Drug use is not a problem unique to the African American community. This problem is as great a problem in white communities, affluent communities. We prosecute it differently.
But we're not just talking about drugs.
In communities of color, you see devastating consequences as a result of our policies. Now, 1 out of 3 black men between the ages of 18 and 35 is in jail, in prison, on probation and parole.
Now we're suspending, expelling, or even arresting kids for the smallest misbehaviors. This trend is called the school-to-prison pipeline. There are pipelines all across the country. Nationwide, as many as 95% of out-of-school suspensions are for nonviolent misbehaviors like these. Suspending or expelling a kid increases his or her chance to drop out of high school. And we know high school dropouts are 3.5 times more likely than high school graduates to be arrested in their lifetime.
Through the juvenile courts and the adult criminal justice system, the United States incarcerates more of its youth than any other country in the world. In 2002, approximately 126,000 juveniles were incarcerated in youth detention facilities alone. Approximately 500,000 youth are brought to detention centers in a given year. This data does not reflect juvenile trialed as adults. Around 40% are incarcerated in privatized for-profit facilities. A recent report from the National Council on Crime and Delinquency found that Black and Hispanic youth are treated more severely than white youth at every point of contact with the system, from arrest to detention to incarceration, even when charged with the same crime.
The new analysis of the U.S. prison population finds more black men are incarcerated now than were enslaved in 1850.
The market for cheap labor is booming behind bars. In the last 15 years, partnership between prisons and private manufacturers has increased significantly. They're becoming America's very own Chinese-style manufacturing line behind prison walls. Prisons, in fact, advertise themselves as such, as an alternative to outsourcing cheap labor to China or elsewhere. On the web, we came across this pitch that prisons prepared to persuade private sector companies to come and do business with them. Take a look.
There is not enough folks that will do this type of work in this country. So therefore, we're bringing back this industry that historically has been going out of this country, and we're putting it, inside the walls, and it's absolutely a perfect idea. I have a workforce that does not have car problems or babysitting problems, etc. They're always here and they're always willing to come to work.
Bring your business to our labor.
A wide variety of industries take advantage of prison labor. Among many other things, prisoners make clothing, textiles, electronics, furniture, and even solar panels.
Just as we're trying to get China to stop with their prison labor, ours is at the same time increasing.
Hundreds of companies have used prison labor directly or through subcontractors, including Microsoft, Boeing, Starbucks, Victoria's Secret, and others. Two of the country's biggest prison corporations made $3.3 billion last year alone.
The time is overdue for new dreams to be born and a new movement to be built that will ensure that mass incarceration will finally come to an end. It's our turn to dream.